Hi, my name is McKenna, and the exercise I will be going over is the glute extension. Here we have our video of the movement. For the movement, we have our description and some biomechanical principles that we will go over. So for the starting position of the movement, we want to have we're going to be in that standing, somewhat tilted forward position with our hips against the pad. We're going to have our feet shoulder width apart and our hips in a neutral position. For our overall movement pattern, the main movement is going to be hip extension, where the hip joint moves from a flexed position to an extended position. So here we can see we go from an extended position down into a flexed and back up into an extended. We're going to have our shoulders slightly rotated forward, and that's just to make sure that we're not having any excessive tilt in our lower back and keeping the hips into the pad and our hamstrings elongated. For our biomechanical principles of the movement, like I said, it is going to be hip extension, and it's going to help with movements like walking, running, and climbing. For our movement phases, we have our initial phase, which is going to be where the hips are flexed with the trunk neutral, and then the glute max is going to be in a slightly stretched position. For the extension phase, the gluteus maximus is going to contract concentrically to extend the hip. And then in the end phase, the muscle is going to elongate eccentrically to return to the starting position. For our muscles involved, our agonist is going to be the gluteus maximus, which is going to originate from the iliac crest, sacrum, and coccyx, and it's going to insert into the gluteal tuberosity of the femur. Our antagonist is going to be the our hamstrings are going to be another agonist that we have, which will originate from the ischial tuberosity and insert into the tibia and fibia. Our antagonists are going to be the iliopsoas and the rectus femoris, and our synergist is also going to be our hamstring, which will assist in the hip extension, primarily during the flexed positions. The joints that are going to be involved is the acetabular joint, which is going to help with the extension, and the patella femoral and tibia femoral that make up the knee joint, which is just going to be in that degreed angle right there. Our gluteus maximus is going to have a concentric contraction during the extension phase, and during the eccentric phase, our gluteus maximus and hamstrings are going to return to the neutral position. As for our isometric, it's just going to be helping with the stabilization, primarily in the core and the pelvis. As for our muscle contribution, our gluteus maximus is the primary agonist that is responsible for the hip extension, and the hamstrings are also going to act as a secondary agonist to help stabilize the knee and assist in the movement. As for our iliopsoas, it's going to serve as an antagonist, resisting the hip extension. For our functional anatomy concepts, we have our length-tension relationship, where the glute max is going to be the most effective at mid-range length during the hip extension, where the tension is the greatest. As for our force velocity, the muscle can produce greater force at slower velocities, so this movement would be best for if it was controlled. For our stretch shorten cycle, the glute's ability to rapidly extend from a flex position is going to benefit this cycle during explosive actions like sprinting and jumping. For our active insufficiency, when the hip is flexed, the glutes are less effective at generating force, so shortening the range of motion during maximum hip extension is what that would be caused from. For passive insufficiency, this is going to occur when the hip is extended and the iliopsoas is stretched, limiting that hip extension. Next, we have our range of motion. For the hip joint, it's going to be 10 to 20 degrees of extension for this movement and for the knee joint, there is minor involvement, so it is mostly going to be remained extended. For our elasticity, extensibility, and contractility, the gluteus max is going to exhibit good contractility for powerful hip extension, extensibility, and eccentric movements, and elasticity for recover and dynamic tasks. The hamstrings are going to have similar properties with the added extensibility for knee flexion during running or dynamic movements. Next, we have our kinematics and kinetics. So for our kinematics, we have our planes of motion. This movement is going to primarily occur in the sagittal plane of motion and is going to rotate around a lateral axis of the hip. The joint action is going to be primarily flexion and extension of that acetabular femoral joint. For our kinetics, we have our moment arms, torque, and levers. So for our moment arms, torque, and levers, the moment arm for the gluteus max during the hip extension is going to be maximized when the thigh is at 90 degrees flexion and decreased as the leg moves toward full extension. For our force vectors, during the extension phase is going to be posteriorly, that is going to generate torque to extend the hip joint. Our internal forces are going to be the muscle contractions, while the external is going to be the force of gravity, the ground reaction time, and any weights that might be used, such as a plate or a dumbbell. For our measurement of force application, we have our torque and we have our work. So for torque, we have 400 newtons for the force. This is going to be the amount of force that the gluteus maximus can produce when it is contracting. And then for the rate, we have 0.6 meters. So this is going to be a total of 240 newtons per meter. For our work, we have our force times distance. So again, that 400 newtons for the amount of force that the glute can produce, and 5 meters for our distance, and which is going to leave us with 200 joules. For our exercises that can address the biomechanical considerations, our first one is going to be a hip thrust. This is going to emphasize hip extension while minimizing knee movement. It's also going to target the glutes more effectively. We also have Romanian deadlifts, also known as RDLs. This will improve hamstring flexibility and glute engagement during the eccentric phase. Our most common injury risk is going to be hyperextension or improper form, which is going to lead to strain in the glutes, lower back, or knees. For optimization, we want to make sure we're really optimizing proper technique so that we are not causing any of those injuries or any potential injuries that had been listed before. This is going to include engaging the core to stabilize the pelvis and making sure to avoid excessive arching in the lower back. As for recommendations, it's recommended to take this movement slow and controlled to focus on form and to make sure that we are not overloading beyond what you are able to handle. And that is the end of it.